I continue where I left off earlier. Radhika's presentation sort of gives a kind of a historical precedent and makes my job a little bit easier, so that I don't have to go into those details. As I was saying earlier, that the impact of globalization is uneven, and it's experienced differently by women according to their caste, class, and family background. So what I do in my presentation is to give you a brief glimpse as to how globalization is experienced by women of different castes. This necessarily is very brief, and if anybody wants to know more, I can give references. The middle classes in India are mostly benefited from the economic globalization initiatives in general. They generally belong to upper caste. So there's a kind of a correlation between upper caste status and middle class. Consumerism among this population is rampant, and women in this segment of population are benefiting from the opening of economic opportunities. They are made to feel that they are finally able to shed their restrictive traditional mores and become modern, more in control of their lives with confidence and competence. But there is, in other words, middle class women have benefited because of neoliberal globalization. But there is considerable anxiety that women go too far and veer away from core values that define Indian womanhood. Radhika talked quite a bit about what they are. While it is considered desirable that women are good, efficient homemakers, shoppers, and are fashion conscious and groom themselves to feel good about their looks and demeanor, so it's okay to buy white dress and things like that. It is expected that they are acutely conscious of their primary identity as mothers, wives, sisters, and daughters. Women are exhorted to be pure mothers of the nation, protect the honor of their family, and preserve the integrity of our proud culture. While borrowing Western technology and using consumer goods are considered desirable, imitating Western cultural mores in personal life is considered dangerous. Nothing less than the purity of the nation, purity of Indian womanhood, sanctity of Indian culture, and honor of the nation itself are considered to be at stake. And with regard to lower caste women, constitutional amendments to correct the past discrimination against such scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes have helped to open opportunities for economic betterment for these castes. But women in these segments of population have been unable to adequately benefit from these initiatives because of the male bias in implementing these policies. As men in these castes became more educated and economically better off, the tendency has been to imitate the behavior and mannerisms of upper castes. Thus, the customs of dowry, restrictions on freedom of movement and freedom of expression for women are being enforced on women in these groups. M.H. Dinoas, one of the famous sociologists, calls this Sanskritization. Historically, women in these segments of population in general have had relative freedom in their daily interactions within their families and communities, since sexual mores were not as strict as in the upper castes. But the impact of the initiatives taken to correct caste ills against these castes has meant for women in these groups a loss of relative autonomy. In essence, these women have paid a heavy price because not only did they lose out on the access to opportunities in the context of these new initiatives because of male bias, they also have lost the relative advantage they had in the past. As consumerism spread to these segments of population, the rate of dowry deaths, violence against women, and female feticide are increasing. Stigma attached to membership in lower caste, particularly for those who occupy the lower rungs of the caste ladder, still prevails in many parts of the country and is more pronounced in rural areas. the next thing I want to talk about is the role of family. Families act as states within states. In the Indian context, there are many assumptions regarding gender relations prevalent in Indian society. Agarwal, one of the development sociologists, she identifies these important assumptions. So I wanted to read yourself because of shortage of time. Since such inegalitarian family structure and ideology has consequences for women in all aspects of their lives, development policies and practices are typically framed and implemented within this context. Women's participation in larger society is determined within these constraints. In cases where families are benevolent towards women, their needs and aspirations are satisfied. In general, it's very difficult, if not impossible, for women to transcend these constraints. Participation of women in political and economic empowerment programs is possible only under conditions where the family is benevolent and supportive. In my own case study of an all-woman panchayat in Atnur, in Karnataka, women are firmly of the opinion that they can serve in the panchayat only if their families and the men in the community support them. They served the first term with such support, but withdrew the second time since they could not obtain such support. Women as mothers and mothers-in-law act as frontline workers to maintain and reproduce the integrity and resilience of patriarchal family structure. Therefore, the reason I'm talking about mothers-in-law is because the statement that women are their own worst enemy is used routinely with the implication that it is a woman's problem. You often hear that whenever you talk about status women, it's pointed out that women themselves are their worst enemy. What is not done is to carefully scrutinize as to why women behave the way they do. Most importantly, one has to realize that women enter their marital homes as outsiders and occupy a position of structural inequality in a patriarchal household. To establish themselves and attain a respected status, they need to serve the interests of the patriarchal family. Their status goes up as they earn the trust and confidence of members of families in positions of authority. It is the mother-in-law, who observes all the tenets of proper womanhood and teaches younger women of the household to accept their subordinate position without question that are highly respected. As the saying goes, while arranging a marriage, one looks at the behavior and mannerisms of the mother and mother-in-law. Internalization of negative female gender self-image facilitates such behavioral pattern also. Women, it's argued, cannot cooperate with each other since their interests do not coincide. For example, in the context of arrangement of marriage, the daughter is interested in getting as much economic assets from the parental family as possible to bolster her status in her husband's family, while the mother endeavors to resist it as much as possible, since it is in her interest to keep the wealth in her husband's or son's family, because that is where she decides or belongs. Sisters' interests do not coincide because they are competing with each other for economic assets within their parental family. Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law cannot cooperate because they are competing for the attention of son-husband. Development of solidarity among women across castes and classes is indeed difficult because of the constraints imposed by families. So my argument is that if we want to address the issue of inequality, gender inequality, we have to address the family structure. Now, how much time do I have? 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Okay. The clock says 5 minutes. Okay, now the next point, I will stop if I cannot cover it completely, but I want you to just read yourself. The reason for bringing this is that we talked about all the problems women are facing, so what do we do about it? ICFC. I thought I should at least very briefly address that issue. So one argument I make is that we have to sort of address the issue of privileges, because those who have privileges have a tendency to consider it a right. Here I give you one example. Amartya Sen, the famous, I quoted him once before, famous economist, he has written quite a bit on Indian women. That's the reason I'm quoting him. During one of his speeches to the IT professionals, made this point very clearly. He argued that IT revolution taken place in India, which has provided tremendous opportunities for economic and other benefits, was possible because during Nehru era, a conscious decision was made to divert significant resources to establish institutes of excellence such as IITs, that is the Indian Institute of Technology, Indian Institute of Sciences, and so on. He argued that by becoming aware of those precedents and the class privileges it has brought forth, will make clear the kinds of responsibilities the IT industry has to Indian society. He further argued that conscious efforts need to be made to find ways and means to help those who are lagging behind by IT professionals and the IT industry in general. He was not trying to point a finger at this industry, but rather to make the general argument about responsibilities that entail those who enjoy privileges. I also, in this presentation, I go into talk about as to how World Social Forum is trying to do precisely this. In their famous statement that another world is possible, what they're trying to do is to how people who have privileges have to become more conscious and try to organize and take care of those who are less privileged. And also, with regard to not only class privilege, we have to talk about caste privilege. It is in this context I talk about the Dalit movement that's going on in India. And even though they have a long way to go, because the Dalit issue is very, very serious, and they still are at the bottom of the social ladder, in spite of a few initiatives, we have to wait and see how far they can go. Their main concern is Kancha Ilaya, one of the important Dalit scholars, argues, for example, in one of the debates that took place in the early part of this year, he argues that English should be taught in public schools. The reason he says that is that the privilege, English privilege, has put the elites, the upper castes and upper classes, in a position where they control all the decisions in the country. So unless that opportunity is opened up for the lower castes also, they will not be able to catch up. And then the next one is for gender privilege, which I would have liked to talk a little more, but I briefly mentioned here the role of women's movement in India. It has, to its credit, some achievements like some legal changes and also economic and political empowerment and reservation of 1/3 positions in the local government structures and so on. This has happened, but nevertheless, one of the important initiatives that is to bring about uniform civil code has not been possible. This is that is, I personally think developing a uniform civil code is most important to address the issue of gender inequality, because that is how we can reduce the kind of stranglehold families have on women's lives. But that has not been possible because the kind of separation between civil law and personal law being influenced by tradition and custom, and also the social practices are informed by them, and women's movement has not been able to organize the movement because cutting across castes is very important to do that, and across religions is very important, and that has not been possible. And the last one I talk about is the privilege of power and the role of spirituality. The only reason I mentioned is that I personally feel that there is some hope, because within India, spirituality movements are gaining momentum, There are many spirituality movements going on, and they are sort of, the attempt there is to sort of integrate human values into day-to-day life. That's what they're trying to do. Even though they do not address gender issues directly, the hope is that if you integrate human values into the way we live, into the way we organize our social life, that the issue of gender inequality also probably will be addressed. That is the hope. So that's the reason I mentioned it. So it's all very brief. Sorry, we are just scratching the surface. It's such a huge topic, but hopefully we can talk a little more during the discussion time. I'll stop here.